NATO has just made one of its largest long-term military commitments to Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion began. The alliance pledged tens of billions of euros in military support while reaffirming its collective defense commitments. Moscow responded with sharp warnings, arguing that these decisions increase the risk of confrontation rather than bringing peace. So the question is no longer whether the war will continue. The real question is this: how will Vladimir Putin respond? Will Russia intensify its military campaign, shift its strategy, or seek new ways to pressure Ukraine and NATO without triggering a direct confrontation? To understand what may happen next, we first need to understand why this NATO summit could become one of the most important turning points of the war. More than 4 years after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the conflict has evolved far beyond a regional war. It has become the largest security crisis in Europe since the Second World War. The battlefield stretches across thousands of kilometers. Missiles and drones strike far behind front lines. Economic sanctions affect global markets. And military decisions made in Washington, Brussels, Moscow, and Kyiv now influence security around the world. Against that backdrop, NATO leaders gathered this week in Ankara. The summit had two primary goals. First, reassure member states that Article 5, the alliance's collective defense commitment, remains ironclad. Second, demonstrate that support for Ukraine will continue despite the war entering another difficult phase. The result was significant. Alliance members announced approximately 70 billion euros in military assistance for Ukraine, alongside major defense agreements designed to strengthen NATO's long-term deterrence capabilities. Leaders also reaffirmed that an attack against one ally remains an attack against all. For Kyiv, these commitments signal that Western military support is expected to continue. For Moscow, however, the message looks very different. Russian officials argue that NATO is expanding military pressure instead of encouraging negotiations. The Kremlin says these decisions increase confrontation rather than reducing it. That disagreement lies at the center of today's strategic challenge. Both sides believe their actions improve security. Both accuse the other of making peace more difficult. And that dynamic makes every new military decision increasingly important. To understand why NATO's announcement matters, it's important to look beyond the headlines. Modern wars are no longer decided only by tanks crossing borders. They are sustained by industrial production, logistics, intelligence sharing, air defense systems, satellite surveillance, and the ability to replace military equipment over time. Ukraine has increasingly relied on this international support to maintain its defenses. Russia, meanwhile, has adapted its own strategy. Rather than depending on rapid breakthroughs, Moscow has focused on gradual advances while expanding missile and drone production and increasing pressure along multiple sectors of the front. At the same time, Ukraine has expanded long-range drone operations against targets inside Russia. Those strikes have included attacks on energy infrastructure and military facilities intended to disrupt Russia's logistics and defense industry. Russia has condemned these operations, while Ukraine argues they are legitimate military targets connected to the war effort. This is where today's situation becomes especially significant. According to Reuters reporting citing Kremlin-linked sources, recent Ukrainian strikes appear to have hardened President Putin's position regarding negotiations. Those sources suggest that Moscow currently sees continued military pressure, not immediate compromise, as the better path toward achieving its objectives. It's important to emphasize that these assessments come from sources familiar with Kremlin thinking rather than official confirmation, and future decisions remain uncertain. That uncertainty is exactly what makes the coming weeks so critical, because the next move may not be defined by a single battle. It may be shaped by strategy, industrial capacity, political decisions, and how each side believes time is working in its favor. As the war enters another year, one reality has become increasingly clear. This is no longer a conflict measured only by territory gained or lost. It is a contest of endurance. For Ukraine, continued military support from Western partners remains essential to maintaining its defensive capabilities. Air defense systems, ammunition, intelligence sharing, and training have become as important as frontline operations. NATO says its assistance is intended to help Ukraine defend itself, while avoiding direct participation in the war. For Russia, the strategy has also evolved. Instead of relying on rapid offensives alone, Moscow has increasingly combined missile strikes, drone attacks, electronic warfare, and pressure across multiple sectors of the front. Russian leaders continue to argue that their military objectives remain unchanged, despite diplomatic efforts and international sanctions. But beyond the battlefield lies another competition that receives far less attention: industrial production. Modern warfare depends on the ability to manufacture artillery shells, drones, missiles, armored vehicles, and replacement equipment faster than an opponent can destroy them. This has become one of the defining lessons of the Russia-Ukraine war. Countries across Europe and North America have expanded defense production, while Russia has also increased military manufacturing to sustain long-term operations. Military analysts increasingly describe this as a war of logistics, as much as a war of maneuver. And that may shape the outcome just as much as any single battle. Now let's move from confirmed developments to analysis. If current trends continue, neither side appears positioned for a quick military victory. Instead, analysts point to several possible scenarios. The first is a prolonged war of attrition, where both sides continue fighting while seeking incremental gains. The second is a renewed diplomatic effort if military costs become unsustainable or political conditions change. A third possibility is further escalation through expanded long-range strikes or intensified attacks on critical infrastructure, increasing risks for regional security. These are scenarios discussed by analysts, not confirmed future events, and much will depend on political decisions in Moscow, Kyiv, Washington, and European capitals. Council on Foreign Relations. The consequences of this war extend far beyond Ukraine. European governments have increased defense spending to levels not seen in decades. Military planners are redesigning doctrine based on lessons learned from drone warfare, electronic warfare, satellite intelligence, and precision-guided weapons. Even countries far from the battlefield are adjusting procurement strategies, after observing how rapidly modern conflicts consume ammunition and equipment. For the United States, the conflict has reinforced several strategic priorities: maintaining alliances, strengthening defense production, preparing for high-intensity warfare, while balancing commitments in Europe, the Indo-Pacific, and the Middle East. These challenges continue to influence American defense policy and military planning. At the same time, Russia views the conflict as part of a broader confrontation with the West, while NATO maintains that its support is intended to uphold Ukraine's right to self-defense under international law. Those competing narratives remain one of the central obstacles to a negotiated settlement. Whatever happens next, the Russia-Ukraine war has already transformed military thinking around the world. Commanders are studying drone operations. Defense industries are expanding production. Governments are rethinking deterrence. And future military doctrines will likely reflect lessons first learned on the battlefields of Ukraine. The story of this war is still being written. Today's decisions, whether made in Kyiv, Moscow, Brussels, or Washington, will shape not only the next phase of the conflict, but also the future of European security. One fact remains beyond dispute. The Russia-Ukraine war has become one of the defining geopolitical conflicts of the 21st century, changing how nations prepare for war, build alliances, and think about global security. The biggest question now is no longer who can win the next battle. It's whether diplomacy can eventually succeed before the costs of this conflict grow even higher. If you enjoyed this in-depth military analysis, subscribe for more fact-based documentaries covering global conflicts, military strategy, and geopolitics. And let us know in the comments, what do you think will shape the next phase of the war, most military strategy, economic pressure, or diplomacy?